Hello, welcome to my true criminal abode. I do hope that everybody is really well and had an absolutely spiffing Christmas. Some of you might have noticed that I have had rather a long break. The last few months have been the worst months of my life. You've probably heard me reference a few times on here my little dog, and he died. And it's been rough. It's been really, really rough. So, if I look like I'm about to burst into tears as I'm talking, my apologies. I'm the kind of person that gets really emotional very easily. So, bear with me. I am easing myself back in, but it's not easy. Everywhere I look, I see memories and I feel constantly heartbroken. Now, you might see me have a wobble a bit during today's case, which is about Vikki Thompson, who took her dog for a walk on a beautiful summer's day in a rural Cotswold village in England. And Vikki never returned home. Now, Vikki's case made legal history in the UK. It was among the first to use major legal change, the end of double jeopardy for murder. Now, for centuries, the double jeopardy law meant that you couldn't be tried twice for the same crime. But here, new forensic evidence opened the door to a second trial. Now, before I begin, my usual trigger warning. This is a true crime channel. If you are new here and you didn't know you had stepped into a true crime channel, there will be talk of murder. And like I always say, your mental health comes first. You can always come back later, even months later, like I have. Sometimes you just need to take that break. So please look after yourself. So with that, let's get on with today's case about Vikki Thompson and the murder solved twice. So 30-year-old Vikki Thompson lived with her husband Jonathan and their two small children, Matthew, who was 7, and Jenny, who was 5. The family lived in Ascott under Wychwood, which was a small and beautiful picturesque village in West Oxfordshire. It lies about 20 miles northwest of Oxford. The area forms part of the Cotswolds, and it's renowned for kind of charming towns and villages. It's got this distinctive honey-coloured Cotswold stone used in the buildings, in the architecture, and it really is just stunning. Now, Ascot under Wychwood had a population of fewer than 600 residents. That's not a lot. And as you can imagine, as a result, it was this tight-knit place where neighbours looked out for one another. It was the perfect place to raise children. And Vikki was devoted to her family. She was a loving wife and a warm and caring mother, raising her children in what she believed was a safe and nurturing environment, surrounded by fields and friendly faces. But in the summer of 1995, that sense of safety was absolutely shattered. Vikki's quiet, happy life was violently stolen, leaving her family devastated. And this small, tight-knit community that she lived in changed forever. So on Saturday, the 12th of August 1995, the day began like any other day for Vikki and Jonathan. They spent the afternoon relaxing in their garden, enjoying the summer sunshine. The couple had recently celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary at the local pub where Vikki worked as a waitress. And the weekend was a chance for the family to just enjoy being together, life together. Later that day, at around 4 o'clock, Vicky set out from their home on Chestnut Drive for a walk with her dog called Daisy. Her little dog was a collie dog, and it was still bright outside. It was light outside. It wasn't even getting dark. It was August, later summer evenings. And it was the kind of day when the village lanes and fields, although they were quiet and rural, they were familiar and safe to Vicky. She walked them every day with her dog. It was familiar, it was safe, and it was something she did all the time, walk her dog. So on this day, she travelled down one of her usual routes, down a quiet country lane near the railway embankment. It was a path that she knew really well. Daisy trotted by her side. But not long afterwards, Daisy returned home, and Daisy was alone. Now, Jonathan was at home, and initially he wasn't overly concerned. He assumed that maybe Vicky had got held up, maybe she was chatting to a neighbour, and basically he expected his wife to kind of follow through the door any moment. But she didn't. And as you can imagine, Jonathan grew increasingly concerned. He bundled the children into the car and kind of drove around the village looking for Vicky. When he returned home a little while later, and obviously he hadn't found her and Vicky still wasn't home, he spoke to neighbours and friends. This was the kind of community where, Jonathan was worried, they were all worried. And so they joined the search. It really was this wonderful, tight-knit community. And so a few of the villagers had got together and they started retracing Vicky's usual path along Shipton Lane, which is the path that she had taken, when one of the group noticed blood stains on the ground. Nearby, they also found broken pieces of jewellery, which were later confirmed by Jonathan to belong to Vicky. Obviously, the group were fearing the worst. And so the search party, they kind of pressed on down this lane. And around about 7 o'clock at night, they spotted a gap in the hedge leading to a field bordered by the railway line. So you've got the path, then you've got this hedge and the field and the railway track. And so they went through this gap and they crossed the field. And there on the railway embankment, they discovered Vicky just lying on this railway embankment. Her face and head were covered in blood, and there were rocks nearby that were also stained with blood. I mean, it was immediately clear she had been violently attacked. Miraculously, she was still alive, but she was barely conscious. Jonathan stayed with his wife, comforting her as she clung to life. This attack had been vicious, and she was incoherently mumbling as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But unfortunately, even with the mumbling, she wasn't able to say who had attacked her. An air ambulance rushed Vicky to the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. Doctors there found that she had received heavy blows to the back of her head and two to her face as well. She had sustained catastrophic head injuries, including multiple skull fractures and severe brain damage. For 6 days, Vicky fought for her life in intensive care, but she never regained consciousness. The attack was just too brutal. And sadly, on 18th of August 1995, doctors switched off Vicky's life support. She had died from blunt force head injuries. Now, her murder, as you can imagine, absolutely shocked the village to its core. Vicky was this young mother. She was out walking her dog in broad daylight when she was attacked for seemingly no reason whatsoever. The impact on a little English village. It's not a city or a town where crime is a little bit more commonplace. This was really shocking. The news absolutely shattered the sense of safety in this community that had long felt insulated from violence. And fear spread that it could happen again. In such a small place, there was this realization that the perpetrator was probably one of their own. The murder of Vikki Thompson triggered a major police investigation. Detectives from the Thames Valley Police launched a full inquiry, scouring the railway embankment and surrounding fields for any evidence. They recovered clumps of blood-stained hair and rocks, along with fragments of jewellery and clothing. There was a bloody shoe print, although we come to find out that it was unlikely this belonged to the perpetrator. Now, in a hedge near the crime scene, officers also discovered a plastic bag containing women's underwear, 2 bras to be specific. Now, tests revealed that these bras were contaminated with semen. The underwear didn't belong to Vikki. It wasn't Vikki's. But it was still significant because of where they were found and what it was. I mean, what are the odds of there being this bag of semen-stained underwear near to, a crime scene? Now, obviously, it could have been a coincidence. I have seen random pairs of pants or socks, um, the occasional shoe lying about in the middle of a field, and I'm kind of like, how the hell? Who's just dropped their pants in the middle of a field? But people do crazy things. It could have been any explanation, but it was still worth investigating, just because of how close to the crime scene that it was. So they have this evidence, and based on what they had so far, detectives concluded that Vikki had been struck repeatedly on the head with a heavy object before being dragged towards the train tracks, possibly to disguise her injuries as the result of a train accident. That seemed really plausible. I mean, why else would the perpetrator go to the effort of dragging Vicky's body across a field? And she hadn't been sexually assaulted either. And then he just leaves. He would have just run away if he wasn't trying to frame it as if she had been hit by a train. So this careful positioning of her body, together with this bag of women's underwear, and this knowledge of the local escape routes, kind of suggested that the attacker was familiar with the area. And so the locals probably were right to fear the probability that it was one of their own. And don't forget, this village has 500 to 600 people. It's really small. So that is terrifying to think that somebody in this really small community has done this. And for what reason? But what the investigators didn't have yet was a motive. Nobody could understand why, because like I say, she hadn't been sexually assaulted. It just didn't make any sense. So within days, police appeals were made to the public, and a reward of £10,000 was quickly offered for information leading to the killer. Posters were distributed, and officers appealed to passengers who had travelled along the Cotswold line the afternoon of Vicky's murder. They were absolutely desperate for any information, and somebody on that train line might have seen something. But, nothing kind of came from that. And of course, what they also did was door-to-door inquiries in Ascott under Wychwood, as well as the neighbouring villages as well. And overall, more than 2,500 people were actually interviewed. Now, officers did get tidbits of information. Some of the residents claimed to have heard a woman screaming at the time of the attack, and other residents said that they heard a dog barking that may have been Daisy. However, amid these fragments, there was one name that just kept popping up: Mark Weston. Now, Mark Weston was a 19-year-old local odd job worker. He lived with his parents in the same village as Vikki and her family, actually not that far away from Vicky's home. Weston was described as a loner and a troublemaker. He was known to let himself into people's houses. He once turned up in a woman's kitchen and another time in a neighbour's garden. He had left school at about 15 with no qualifications and had a reputation for petty crime. He had actually been fired from one of his jobs for stealing from a colleague. Generally, he was known in the village for being a loner, being a little bit odd, and just generally distrusted in the community. He was nobody kind of thought he was violent. Nobody thought he was capable of murder. He just wasn't particularly trusted, a little bit of an oddball, and people were wary of him just because of his kind of reputation, the petty crime, those small things. And there were certainly little red flags kind of flapping around him. What was interesting, though, was that he was known in the area to frequent Shipton Lane, where Vikki was walking when she was attacked. And some witnesses did actually place him in the area at the time that Vikki was walking Daisy. The clerk at the village post office saw him running away from the village about an hour after the attack and said that he was looking kind of alarmed and a little bit sweaty. I mean, he could have just been out for a jog, I suppose. But I think it's pretty obvious when somebody is just out for a jog and is kind of looking like they've done something bad. And so overall, the information about Weston kind of drew the attention of detectives. And on the 22nd of August 1995, the police visited Weston at his home to question him. Now, initially, Weston claimed that he had been shopping and fishing before spending the afternoon at home. When he was questioned again 3 days later, his story changed, and he now said he had been at home all day. A few days later, his account shifted again, claiming he had left his house at 5 o'clock to call on neighbours who happened to not be in. Now, the investigators went to see these apparent neighbours, and they said that they had actually been home the whole time and that Weston hadn't been around. So it looks like he was lying, on top of changing his story multiple times. Again, I mean, to be fair, he could have had just a really crap memory. But regardless, the inconsistencies were suspicious. And on the 13th of September, Weston was taken to the police station for further questioning. He maintained that he had been home during the attack, adamant that he had nothing to do with Vikki's murder. He came across as belligerent, as arrogant, claiming he was being unfairly targeted by the police and disliked by certain villagers. He was basically pulling the victim card. I mean, if it was me, I would want to come across as helpful. I would want to help the investigation. Why be kind of awkward about it? But anyway, meanwhile, scenes of crimes officers, they were back at Weston's house. And when they searched the garden, they found the charred remains of his clothing that he had attempted to burn. Why would you do that? Officers seized clothing and a pair of boots from inside the house, and they seized all this for testing. Now, the boots would become very, very important in this case later on. But for now, in 1995, the forensic analysis that was carried out did not reveal any blood traces. There was nothing, nada, on these boots. And so Weston was released. Obviously, the investigation continued anyway. They still had a murderer to find. And later DNA testing would go on to link Weston to that semen that was found on that underwear near the crime scene. So that was his bag of stained women's underwear. But that alone was not enough to obviously tie him to Vikki's murder. Now, further searchers actually uncovered another bag of women's underwear along a waterway behind the street where Weston lived. These items had been stolen from washing lines in the village and deliberately hidden after Vikki's attack. So basically, whoever had done this, i.e. Weston, he didn't want them in his home being found by the police and connecting him to the scene. What a little perv. I don't care. I don't care what somebody's sexual preferences are. But buy your own underwear. Don't steal it from women's washing lines. It is an invasion of privacy. Now, none of the clothing belonged to Vikki. But what that discovery did hint was that the offender, i.e. Weston, had a fetish for stealing women's underwear and hiding it. Now, that alone, however, doesn't scream murder. But what the investigators believed was that it could have provided a motive that they were missing for violence if he had been confronted. So what the investigators surmised was that during Vikki's walk, she may have encountered Weston engaged in, a sexual act. She confronted him or startled him or whatever. Weston lashed out violently, striking her with a rock to silence her, because he would have wanted to prevent any humiliation, if that news kind of spread around the village. And so basically, it was likely that this wasn't premeditated, but it was something that got out of hand, basically to save face, which is just tragic. Somebody lost their life because somebody was startled doing something they shouldn't have, and things just got out of hand. But regardless, he still went out of his way not to hide the body, but to make it look like something else had happened to that body. So regardless, the man is vile. Now, on the 21st of September 1995, Crime Watch UK broadcast an appeal about Vikki Thompson's murder. And it was revealed during this programme that a witness, no one knew about this at the time until this Crime Watch broadcast, but basically that a witness had reported seeing a naked man in the area around the time of the attack. And this witness later saw the same naked man again running across a nearby field. The man was described as white, pale-skinned, tall, aged between 20 and 30. Sound like anyone we know? So with witness accounts placing Weston near the scene and women's underwear bearing Weston's DNA also recovered in the vicinity, police believed they had enough evidence to proceed with a case against Mark Weston. And on 1st of February 1996, he was formally charged with the murder of Vikki Thompson. Good. Now, his trial began at Oxford Crown Court on the 12th of November that year. But, suspicion was strong. Everybody knew it was Weston. But the prosecution's case relied largely on circumstantial evidence. So basically, the forensic findings established Weston's presence in the area and his sexual interests. So they could kind of place him at the scene at some time, but that didn't conclusively prove that he had attacked Vikki. He was there at some point, but not necessarily at the same time as Vikki. And so there was no concrete link that he even came into contact with Vikki, because don't forget, at this time as well, there was nothing on his clothing that they took for testing. His boots were clean, there was no blood, nothing. So they had no actual physical evidence tying him to Vikki. And on top of that, the judge also ruled inadmissible that bag of underwear, bearing Weston's DNA, because they believed that its inclusion would compromise the fairness of the proceedings. So basically, what that bag of underwear proved was that he had stolen underwear from washing lines and was sexually deviant, but none of the underwear actually belonged to Vikki, and it didn't prove he killed her. So the judge was concerned that if the jury heard about Weston's sexual activity and fetish, they might convict him simply because they found his behaviour a bit disturbing or immoral, rather than because the evidence kind of proved that he had committed murder. It's what's called bad character evidence, and it's evidence that unfairly sways a jury. So it kind of sucks, but with this vital evidence excluded and basically only circumstantial evidence from the prosecution, the jury retired to consider its verdict, and after less than an hour of deliberation, they returned a verdict of not guilty. Less than an hour, that was quick. That was how little evidence there was. That's really quick. I think it's rare to be that quick, but the jury just didn't feel like the evidence was there to convict him. And so, as you can imagine, that was an absolute blow. For Vicky's family, the acquittal, it was devastating. And it was devastating for the officers as well, who were so desperate to get justice for Vicky and her family. It's one of those cases when you watch the documentaries and you watch and hear the officers that were involved in this case speaking, and you can just see how personal it felt to them and how frustrated they were because they knew damn well that Mark Weston was guilty. But there was nothing they could do. The case had literally reached a dead end. With double jeopardy, he couldn't be tried again. And that was it. So Mark Weston, he kind of returned to village life and the community. And as you can imagine, this poor village was left with the knowledge that the man that many of them believed was responsible, not all of them, but many of them believed was responsible, was living among them. So, for more than a decade after Mark Weston's acquittal, the murder of Vicky remained officially unsolved. But the case was never closed, it was just unsolved. Because Mark Weston had been found innocent, which meant, even though everyone knew it was him, it meant that there was still a murderer out there. And so Vicky's case still needed solving. But regardless, suspicion still continued to linger in Ascott under Wychwood, with many residents convinced that Weston had escaped justice. His continued presence in the village was this constant reminder, not only of unanswered questions surrounding Vicky's death, but this unsettling sense of danger that still hang over the community. Because for women, walking home at night or dog walkers out walking alone along the country paths, that fear would have been constant. Can you imagine being a female or a dog walker knowing that a killer was probably in the village? It would just be terrifying. It would be awful. I mean, a police officer even went on the news at one point and warned women not to go out. And this went on for 15 years. 15 years. This village lived in fear. Crazy. I mean, if you're a dog walker like me, or at least like I used to be, you'll understand that fear. You know, you really want to enjoy the beauty around you, but you've always got one eye and one ear open for that danger that possibly could happen. And it kind of ruins your peace, you know? And it's not fair that we live in a world like that, but we do. And that's just generally, you know, that's how people feel walking around in, you know, places where nothing's happened. If you imagine walking around there where there is still a murderer running free who hasn't been caught, that's a trillion times worse. Now, obviously, you know, throughout the next years, Weston continued to deny any responsibility. This man even appeared on a televised interview at his home with ITV News after his acquittal. And he declared, "I've done nothing wrong, but they still kept saying it was me, knowing it wasn't. But now they've come to realise they had the wrong person." Basically, he was trying to paint himself as the victim. So he began the case doing this, being the victim. Everyone, the villagers don't like me. I'm being personally attacked. He painted himself as somebody that was being wronged by the community, basically. It's classic self-victimization. It's often used by kind of narcissistic personalities to deflect blame and gain sympathy. Seeking attention, controlling the narrative, refusing accountability, lack of remorse. Again, these are all narcissistic traits. In my opinion, anyway. I mean, obviously, I'm not a professional, but I would say there's an element of narcissism going on there. Because surely you've been found not guilty, you'd kind of just want to keep your head down and lie low, but, we're all different. Now, later, the jury foreman, so in that trial that he had, the foreman of the jury actually wrote to Weston, urging Weston to sue the police for wrongful arrest. What this foreman actually said was, "I hope you are all getting on well now and hope you go ahead and get big compensation from the police as they had no evidence of any sort whatsoever." I mean, to be fair, he did kind of have a point. It's not that they didn't have evidence whatsoever, but they didn't have anything concrete. Stealing women's underwear doesn't make you a murderer, and the judge didn't even allow that particular evidence anyway, so they probably didn't even know about that evidence. So, he did have a point, but still, it just seems a bit weird to me that you would actually encourage somebody who, I don't know. It just seems weird that you would encourage somebody to sue the police. But I don't know. He obviously felt very strongly at the time that Weston was innocent. So, and not everybody thought he was guilty, but a lot of people did, particularly the people in the village who knew him, and obviously the police, because for the police, it was pretty obvious it was him. So Weston did actually try and get legal aid to kind of pursue suing the police, but nothing came of that. So nothing happened there. But like I say, he's got away with murder. So if it was me, I would just be lying my head low for a bit, not drawing any more attention than is necessary. But Weston, like I say, I think he's got these slight kind of narcissistic elements to him. And so instead, he doesn't lie low. He turns his energy towards revenge, targeting those involved in the original investigation. The investigation that he was actually guilty of, but he wanted revenge anyway. One person he targeted was the village policeman who had actually helped to investigate the case. Now, according to one of the neighbours of this policeman, Weston actually decapitated a chicken and left it at the policeman's front door. Weston also made silent and obscene phone calls to the officer, his wife, and his daughters, and he did this day and night. He was obsessed with getting revenge on this officer. Now, the police actually installed video surveillance on the village telephone box, and they recorded his calls. And on the 18th of December 1997, Weston was convicted of harassment and given a 2-year conditional discharge along with a restraining order. But that didn't deter him. Oh no. He later put up posters about one of the other villagers who had provided evidence, branding this particular villager, this witness, as a grass. He also shone lights through a neighbour's windows and posted threatening notes through their door. On 28th of January 1999, Weston was again convicted of harassment and sentenced to 100 hours of community service. So it's coming to light, isn't it, that this man really is not very nice. In fact, Weston's threatening behaviour extended beyond the village. Now, it's been a few years. He is now 26 years old, so he was about 19/20 when he murdered Vikki, and he's now 26. And he found work as a barman in a nearby pub. I think it was in another village nearby. And he began a relationship with a girl who worked there as a waitress. This girl was called Helen, and she was 15 years old at the time. So we're seeing a bit of a picture here. He stole women's underwear, which showed a disregard for boundaries. And when at 26, he began a relationship with a 15-year-old, that shows him seeking someone younger and more vulnerable, somebody he could control. Now, overall, obviously, this is my interpretation. I'm not a psychologist, like I say, but it does hint at a struggle to relate to women his own age, or women at all, really. Hence, stealing their underwear rather than having a relationship with a woman. So, anyway, regarding the relationship with Helen, at first he appeared charming, but soon he became possessive, controlling, aggressive, and he subjected Helen to repeated abuse. Now, the couple actually went on to have a daughter together, but Weston liked a drink, vodka in particular, and his drinking kind of spiraled. There was one occasion when Helen wanted to spend the last bit of money they had on nappies for their daughter. They were down to their last few quid and her child needed nappies. But Weston, of course, he wanted vodka. And he flew into a rage and tried to strangle Helen. Now, Helen finally found the courage to take their daughter and leave him. Weston's response was to send her threatening text messages. Now, one of these messages read, "I killed her and I would do the same to you." I killed her. So he is basically admitting it. Now, he's got double jeopardy law behind him, so he thinks he is untouchable. Now, Helen did actually show the text to the police, but there was nothing that they could do. Weston had already been acquitted of Vikki Thompson's murder. He was covered by double jeopardy. And if you're still kind of unsure what double jeopardy law is, like I say, it prevented anyone from being tried for the same crime twice. So he got away with it. He was acquitted and they couldn't touch him again. It was a crazy law. Even if the person later confessed outright, if they walked into a police station and they said, actually, it was me, there was nothing the law could do. It was bonkers. Now, the principle of the law, it did originally make sense. It protected somebody against kind of state abuse. So basically being prosecuted until the state got the outcome they wanted, because I guess, if you've got dodgy law going on, if you want to brand somebody guilty, you just keep prosecuting them over and over and wearing that person down until you get the outcome that that person is guilty. So it kind of protects somebody from that. And it enables them to move on with their life without that fear of being retried for the same crime kind of hanging over you. So the theory made sense, but there needs to be common sense, and people confessing after the fact, science, forensics, those things are constantly improving. And Weston's case is a really good example of that, because one, he's practically confessing, although, well, I guess that's not a kind of legal thing. It's his word. He could have said that because he was angry or whatever. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But this law emboldened him to see himself as untouchable, which legally he was, for now, because change was coming. In 2003, Parliament abolished the common law rule of double jeopardy in England and Wales. Now, the reform applied to serious offences such as murder, and it opened the door for cases like Vicky's to be revisited if new and compelling evidence emerged. Now, this change came into force in 2005, which actually happened to be the 10th anniversary of Vicky's murder. And that year, Thames Valley Police's cold case review team, they reopened Vicky's case and they returned to the evidence that they had seized from Weston, hoping, praying that advances in forensic science would reveal what earlier testing could not. As you can imagine, it's been like 15 years, and since Vicky's death, techniques had improved dramatically, allowing samples that once yielded little to be examined with far greater sensitivity. And you remember these boots that they seized from his home, and I said that these boots would be very, very important. Well, at the time, they found nothing at all. But they were retested using halogen lamps and microscopes not available or that they didn't use in 1995. These boots were literally pulled apart to get into the seams and the crevices. And this time, forensic scientists detected blood staining. The DNA profile matched Vikki Thompson. They had him. Because before they had circumstantial evidence only, that he was in the area. But that didn't mean he murdered her. But now, this time, they had her blood on his boots. And that blood must have been wet when it transferred to his boot for it to kind of get into the crevices like it did. He couldn't argue that it got there some other way, that he had stepped on dried blood or anything like that. That blood was wet, and it placed him firmly at the scene while Vikki was freshly bleeding. Apparently, he had done his best to clean these boots, which is why the original test didn't reveal any kind of blood sputter at all. It kind of got right into the crevices, and for whatever reason, the equipment back in 1995 wasn't strong enough to kind of pick up the bits that had kind of got underneath. But it was also damn lucky. I mean, I believe in fate. I believe this was fate because it was damn lucky that the police even had those boots still in evidence. It was by chance that they were still in storage because Weston had every right to ask for those boots back once he was acquitted, and he must have just forgot about them. And thank God he didn't ask for them back, because these boots proved that he murdered Vikki. And so over the next 4 years, detectives rebuilt the case. And in October 2009, Weston was rearrested. He was presented with the new evidence, but once again, he was described by officers as arrogant and furious that this was happening to him again. This man did not take any responsibility for Vicky's murder. You don't get the sense that there was any remorse from this man. He was just cocky the whole time. He had this bravado. But this time he couldn't really wheedle his way out of it. On 8th of July 2010, the Crown Prosecution Service authorised a retrial under the new double jeopardy provisions. And the Court of Appeal overturned Weston's original 1996 acquittal. So that was basically thrown out. He was no longer innocent and he had to go to trial again. And on 29th of November 2010, Weston stood trial for a second time at Reading Crown Court. It was one of the first double jeopardy cases brought before the courts, and notably the first murder retrial based on new forensic evidence, rather than a confession. So it wasn't technically the first double jeopardy case per se. Other earlier double jeopardy retrials did exist. But they weren't murder cases, and they hinged on different kinds of evidence, like confessions. Whereas this one, Weston's one, was a murder retrial based on new forensic evidence. And this time, at this trial, the jury heard not only all this new forensic evidence, i.e., the blood traces on Weston's boots, but also the underwear evidence that had been excluded in 1996. I guess it built a bigger overall picture of the kind of person he was. And with the evidence on the boots, it built this picture of what he was doing there and why he attacked Vikki. The jury were also shown the abusive text messages that Weston had sent to his teenage girlfriend, which revealed his violent tendencies. I mean, it was obvious. It reinforced the prosecution's case that he was completely capable of brutally attacking Vikki. And finally, on the 13th of December 2010, 15 years after Vikki's murder, the jury found now 35-year-old Mark Weston guilty of Vikki Thompson's murder. And everyone breathed a sigh of relief. There were sobs from the public gallery as the jury returned their unanimous guilty verdict. Weston showed no emotion as the verdict was returned. No surprise there. And I bet that original juror, the one that said that Weston should sue the police, I bet he felt like a right numpty now. But anyway, Weston was guilty. Praise be. But don't be celebrating quite yet. He was sentenced to life in prison. Good. With a minimum term of 13 years. 13. 1-3. Not 3-0. 1-3. 13. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean kind of an automatic release. In fact, he was actually eligible to apply a couple of years ago in 2023. And there's no public record that he did apply. I don't know. There's no public record of it. So he has, since 2023, been eligible to apply for parole. But still, it's the fact that he can. And for the poor family, knowing that he could apply any day, that must be absolutely torturous. And it's insulting as hell, I think. He had murdered a woman for no reason other than not being humiliated. I mean, masturbate in your own bloody bedroom, for God's sake. It's insulting. Plus, he had been out for 15 years. He'd already been free for 15 years. He should have had 13 years on top of that 15 years. So he should have got 30-year minimum term. I don't know. I'm not legal. But what he got, it was wrong. And I personally think that that minimum term should have been a hell of a lot longer. Or never. Quite frankly, never. So that was the case of Vikki Thompson. And I do have to say that everybody involved with this case worked their butts off to get justice for Vikki. And, credit where credit's due. And it really does show the importance of never giving up on justice, even when it takes years to arrive. And you can kind of use that mantra in life generally, don't give up on the things you believe in. And yeah, I think that's a big message to take away from Vikki's case. Don't give up. So that is it. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you for bearing with me. I might be a bit flaky for a little while. I miss my little man dog more than anything. Usually after a case, I take my apologies. I said I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to cry today, but it's difficult. And usually after I finish the case, I usually take him for a walk and I hug a tree. You've heard me talking about hugging a tree, and it's not about hugging the tree. It's about grounding yourself. And when you're dealing with difficult cases where you've got these scummy people that murder people for no reason but other than their selfishness, it's good to just ground yourself. And I've not been out of this house in weeks because I can't go out. So I'm not doing that, and it's tough. But yeah, let's honour Vikki. And this case is about Vikki, not about me. Let's honour Vikki's memory. And let's do that by just saying we're never going to give up on the things that are important to us. Thank God those officers didn't give up on justice. And it's important in life. Don't give up. So thank you for sticking with me to the end. Sorry about the ugly cry face there for a second. And hopefully I haven't put you off, and that I will see you back here next time for another true crime case at my True Criminal abode. Bye.
See you.